Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about some Dynasty sell high trade targets who are impending NFL free agents.
Hike!
So for this episode, we're going to be talking about two each. These are going to be players who are currently free agents. Doesn't mean that the teams won't re-sign them. We won't know that until later February, early March. But they could happen to be free agents, and their values could change quite drastically. So, Joe, who's your first player?
Yeah, first player I'm going to go with is quarterback Sam Darnold, currently of the Minnesota Vikings. And I think he's a sell high candidate just because, he's coming off a really good year. He had a 66.2 completion percentage, threw for 400 and 319 yards, 35 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and finished as the QB7 on the year. Not bad for a guy that you was able to get pretty late and turned out to be a top 10 quarterback this year. But my concern would be is I don't think he's going to necessarily go back to Minnesota. So maybe there's somebody that looks at Sam Darnold's numbers. Maybe they think he will go back to Minnesota and allows you to sell high on him. I personally think the Minnesota Vikings won't want to pay him this top dollar. I think Kevin O'Connell believes he can kind of have any quarterback and kind of do this as he's shown last year. They won games with a bunch of different quarterbacks last year, and they drafted J.J. McCarthy, in the top 10. I don't see them like keeping Sam Darnold there, making him wait. And not to mention, you're going to have to give Sam Darnold the bag to keep him. And I don't know if you do that with a guy that you spend high draft capital on behind him.
I think the only way that Sam Darnold stays as a quarterback for the Vikings is he wins a Super Bowl. That's the only way I could possibly see the Vikings saying we can't get rid of our Super Bowl winning quarterback. I mean, maybe they would. I would have a hard time believing that.
Well, I mean, that's not a bad price to pay, though. You paid him $10 million for this year, and then he's going to win you a Super Bowl.
No, I get that, but you just had it. If he led that team to success and they win a Super Bowl, and then you're just going to let him go, and there's a risk of you regressing as a result, that might be hard to pass. But what I do think is interesting in looking at the Dynasty trade chart here for Draft Sharks, Sam Darnold right now is rated at the same amount as Jared Goff. That seems crazy to me.
That's interesting. I mean, Sam Darnold's 27, obviously younger than Jared Goff is, but I mean, it is kind of interesting because you don't know quite where Sam Darnold's going to go, and Jared Goff is going to be with the Lions, and they're going to continue to have that high-powered offense. So, I mean, that is interesting. I would take Goff over Darnold.
I would too.
Given the stability.
I would too, and Tua's below him as well. I think I'd rather have Tua over Darnold.
I'm not so sure.
Really?
I'm concerned about Tua in that offense. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know. Like after this year, I have my concerns about Tua and just how that offense looked, and I don't know. Is Tyreek Hill going to be there or not? I think there's a lot of questions.
He already said he's gonna.
Yeah, but I mean, does that organization not like the way that ended? Do they think differently? You never know.
Knows?
Yeah.
I here's the thing. I agree with you 100%. I'm selling high on Sam Darnold. I'm going to get whatever I can for him because if he leaves there and he goes to the Raiders or if he goes to, I don't think he'd go to the Titans, but just thinking about teams where he may go, he had a ton of success because of Kevin O'Connell and the way he's been able to work with quarterbacks. Let's not forget the Sam Darnold who was in Carolina and in New York. Obviously Kevin O'Connell was able to get a lot out of him, but the Vikings, are a good team. They have a solid offensive line. They've got offensive weapons. Depending on where Darnold goes, there's no guarantee that he can just continue the success he's had. So he's a QB7 this year. I don't know how many people believe in him, but more so in a super flex league, I think that would probably be more of the interest than in a redraft league. In a super flex league, you're looking at they're talking about a third-round pick that you could get for him. What I find interesting is, again, they have Jared Goff and Trevor Lawrence as the same value. Dak Prescott is 3 more, and Baker Mayfield is 6 more. I would much rather have Baker Mayfield. If I could possibly, add in a draft pick and get Baker Mayfield for, Sam Darnold and a draft pick for Baker, I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think the main thing is try to sell Sam Darnold off of this one really great year that he had, and it's really the only time he showed promise. And I do think it has everything to do with his situation in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell having guys like Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison to throw the ball to, the run game as well with the offensive line play, and if he's not back in Minnesota, just take advantage of that and get some of these more proven guys at the quarterback position.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So my first player I'm going to be talking about here is running back J.K. Dobbins of the LA Chargers. Had a good season this past year, 195 attempts, 905 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns, 38 targets, 32 catches, 153 receiving yards, 0 receiving touchdowns. Ended up being the running back 24 and played 13 games. Joe, here's my thing when it comes to J.K. Dobbins. He had, arguably his best season as a pro other than his rookie year. When he was a rookie, he played 15 games, which is the most amount of games he's ever played. And he had 805 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns. Here he had 905 and 9 touchdowns. So again, pretty similar stats when you look at J.K. Dobbins. But other than that, Joe, he's missed one season he didn't play any games. Another season he played 1 game. And another season he played 8 games. The guy just can't stay healthy. And when you look at this upcoming NFL draft, this is a fantastic running back class. So we're talking about multiple. Could be reminiscent of the draft. I'm trying to remember what draft exactly. I think it was a Joe Mixon draft. I'm trying to remember what draft that was. But you had Joe Mixon came out. Aaron Jones was in that draft. McCaffrey was in that draft. Like, there were just a ton of really good players. Dalvin Cook was in that draft. I mean, it was a huge draft class for running backs and really changed the game from a dynasty perspective for at least, the next 8 years that these guys have. So this is going to be a really good class. There's no guarantee the Chargers bring back J.K. Dobbins. And if J.K. Dobbins doesn't go back to Chargers, which is one of the best landing spots he could have went. We were, when we were talking last offseason and saying, what are some ideal landing spots? LA Chargers was like screaming because we knew that Jim Harbaugh loves to run the ball. So there's no guarantee he comes back. And even if he does, he hasn't proven he's been able to stay healthy. When he's JK 2 legs, he does pretty good, but is he going to have 2 legs or 1 leg? So at the end of the day, to me, if you look at his value, I would say you try to cash in and get as much as you can for the guy. Is it a lot? No, not really, but it's at least something out there. And for me, I'm going to take it. I mean, right now you're looking at, maybe you get a 3rd round pick, maybe you get a 4th round pick, and you might say, well, why would I do that? Well, would you trade him for Bucky Irving right now? I bet you would. And if you would do that, then Bucky Irving was drafted in probably in your 3rd or 4th round last year, possibly, and you could have had him. So to me, I would definitely be trying to trade this guy if I could.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just because if he's not on the Chargers, I don't want him. I mean, there's just the perfect situation for him with the familiarity, with Greg Roman being the offensive coordinator. He was familiar with that system. The guy, like you mentioned, Jim Harbaugh as the head coach, likes to run the ball. They have a, good offensive line for these guys to run behind. And, the fact that he was able to be relatively healthy this year, put up great numbers. And obviously you tied his career high in 9 touchdowns. I mean, if there's somebody that truly believes in J.K. Dobbins and thinks he'll go somewhere else and have these opportunities, it's the opportunity to sell him now.
Well, and there's some Dobbins believers out there. There's some fanatics who've been big J.K. Dobbins.
I mean, I've always liked J.K. Dobbins, but it's just been tough because he can't stay healthy.
Right. Well, and now he's kind of finally proven himself. But my thing is, even if he goes back to LA, they probably are drafting a running back. I mean, I don't think Gus. I don't know if Gus Edwards will come back or if they'll cut him. Kamani Vidal was a huge disappointment, but he was a late round flyer for him. So what says that Jim Harbaugh doesn't draft Donovan Edwards?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like you saw him bring Hassan Haskins in, former Michigan guy. So it's like it's totally possible. Donovan Edwards, who was a very talented running back in Michigan, you would know, Joe. He could easily get drafted in the third round or something like that. And even if J.K. Dobbins is on the team, he's going to be saying, "Hey, move on the side, buddy," because Donovan's
It
going
would
to
be
take over.
interesting if they do get a guy like Donovan Edwards. I'm not so sure he can be an every down back. That's what my concern would be. But he's a great receiver out of the backfield. So I'm curious to see if there's teams out there that believe he can be an every down back, or I kind of more so see him as a third down back. But at the same time, I kind of thought that's what Bucky Irving was, and he's kind of proven that he can handle it. But I'd be curious to see if that's how. I mean, nobody knows him better than Jim Harbaugh and would know how to deploy him. So I'm not sure like if he would ride with him as a 3 down back or not.
So, Joe, who is your next dynasty sell trade target?
Yep, we're going to stay at the running back position, and I'm going to go with running back Najee Harris. And he had 263 carries this year. He got 1,043 yards rushing, 6 touchdowns. He had 48 targets, 36 receptions for 283 yards, and finishes the RB20 on the season. And, it's just been crazy. Despite all of the fact that the Pittsburgh Steelers haven't had the best offensive line, all the quarterback shakeups that he's had, between having Ben Roethlisberger to, different rookies and the Russell Wilson situation this year, he's been able to get over 1,000 yards every single season. He's just been a, solid mainstay. He hasn't really got injured. He's played all 17 games every year. And really the only thing that's kind of holding him back to being, a higher finishing running back is just his number of touchdowns. I know he had 6 this year, but the most he's ever had is 8 rushing touchdowns. And then his first 3 years, he had 10 total if you add in the 3 receiving. But that's it. I mean, you're talking about 2 years where he had double-digit touchdowns, and that's really what's holding him down. And I think he's a sell because I think obviously he was a highly touted running back coming out of Alabama. I think he's got name value that you can sell high on him. Doesn't really do anything flashy. He's just a solid running back that's just always there. But I just wonder if he's not. I don't think the Steelers don't typically re-sign running backs. Saw it with Le'Veon Bell, James Conner. They let these guys go. So I'd be shocked if he was added back to the Pittsburgh Steelers. But my concern would be if he goes elsewhere. I don't know if he necessarily gets the workload that he has been with the Steelers. The Steelers have been 263 carries this year, but then there's been other years, rookie year, he had 307 and 272. So he's always been the workhorse guy for Pittsburgh. And more and more you see teams use multiple backs. And I'd be concerned about his volume on a different team. And he's a guy that needs volume to have success.
I also would be shocked if the Steelers sign him back. Even the post-game reports of what he had said about the Steelers locker room was just kind of odd. I just think that Steelers locker room honestly might be in some real trouble. I mean, yeah. I don't know if you saw. I mean, it's a little bit of a tangent, but George Pickens' answer, I'm like, oh my goodness, like,
nah.
Yeah, nah. Yeah, that's what it is. It is not good. That's not good.
His belief in the offense going forward, the future.
Yeah. Well, so I think Najee Harris will be a free agent. The question will be, first off, well, how do teams respond? Because this guy, when you look at his rookie year, when he had a guy like Ben Roethlisberger, he can be a decent receiving back as well. He was predominantly used as the power back in the offense, with Jaylen Warren really being more involved in the receiving game. So I think, he's kind of one of those guys who I think based on where his landing spot could improve. But I would feel a lot better if the running back class wasn't going to be so good. And because of that, that makes me concerned as to where could he actually go. That's my problem with him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, honestly, the perfect landing spot could be the Dallas Cowboys for him. Because like they don't really have an established running back. I'm not, you're never sure what Jerry Jones is going to do as far as the draft, if they're going to draft one or not. Like everyone presumed they were going to draft one this year. They just didn't. I mean, and they rolled out with Rico Dowdle, and he had a pretty good season in his own right. But I do think it would be interesting. Like, that's probably one of the main spots I would think Najee would be interesting in, a place where he could get a decent amount of volume and really on a team like the Cowboys that desperately need a run game.
Yeah, that's an intriguing landing spot for him, Joe. I honestly, the team I was actually thinking about who I thought would be kind of a good landing spot for him was actually in the division with the Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
With Nick Chubb getting up there in age and, him coming back from that injury, don't really know how much they could rely on him. Now they still have Jerome Ford. But I don't know. I mean, that offense is very heavily dependent on the run. So I wonder if Najee Harris going to Cleveland would be kind of interesting.
Well, I think it'd also be interesting to see the reports out there that they're going to heavily pursue Kirk Cousins here as well. And, Kirk Cousins isn't a mobile guy, and he would definitely just dump it down to Najee. So that would definitely help with his receiving game. As you mentioned, like it was Ben Roethlisberger late in his career. He was no longer running around. I mean, Najee had 94 targets that year, and he was just dumping it down to him. I mean, I could see Kirk Cousins kind of doing the same thing with those checkdowns.
Oh, and you know what? I believe that 100%. You got to remember, Kevin Stefanski came from Minnesota. He had a lot of success. When Kirk Cousins was having success in Minnesota, he's on the hot seat. He needs to, do something now. And he has not been able to have good quarterback play. Who knows if Kirk can, fully be himself as he rehabilitates from that Achilles injury. But with the familiarity of the system and what I think Stefanski wants to do, which Watson's unable to do, makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and unlike this running back we class we talk about, the QB class isn't nearly as good. So, them going out and being aggressive with Kirk Cousins would make a ton of sense.
He's definitely the most intriguing, I think, of the running back free agent class. It'll be interesting to see where Najee goes.
Yeah, he definitely is. I mean, he's definitely like most accomplished, and outside of Aaron Jones, but he's older. So like the fact that Najee's is still 26 years old, and the success that he's had, it makes him interesting.
Well, it'd be interesting too. Last point here is we saw the success of Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, even a Joe Mixon, right? All these guys who were free agent running backs that were kind of left for scraps. These teams don't want to have to re-sign a second contract for a running back, and what do you know? All of these guys are making a huge impact on their teams. So, do general managers kind of change their mindset on the running back position as a whole? Because especially Saquon and Derrick Henry, they have been franchise altering as far as what the Ravens and Eagles have been able to do this season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've both kind of rejuvenated their careers and also, rejuvenated the teams that they've been on. I mean, taking Baltimore to another level in Derrick Henry, and then the same thing for the Eagles. I mean, the Eagles and Jalen Hurts kind of fell off at the end of last year, but having that Saquon Barkley effect back there behind that offensive line has brought them to the next level too.
So last player we're going to be talking about here, and probably the most controversial of them all, Joe, is wide receiver Tee Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. He was wide receiver 17 on the year, had a really good season, ended up having 109 targets, 73 catches, 911 yards, and 10 touchdowns. I think the biggest thing with him is, does he stay in Cincinnati? He already received the franchise tag once. They still have to extend and sign Jamar Chase. He's still under that rookie contract, even though he's a year behind Tee Higgins. They've got to figure that out. So can the Bengals are first off, we already know the owner, Mike Brown, is not a guy who spends a lot of money, right? They are very frugal when it comes to their spending. They've already spent a lot of money on Burrow. Now, obviously, Burrow wants both Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase, but if you just look at the NFL landscape, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, Joe, it's very rare to see a team invest that heavily at a position and spend all that money on two top receivers. Because you're talking about Jamar Chase, his contract will break the bank. It will surpass Justin Jefferson's contract. Tee Higgins won't, but it's still going to be pretty high. So the amount of money allocated to just those two guys is going to be astronomical as far as how they look at how they want to. Because it's the thing, is Tee Higgins a talent player? Absolutely. But are they going to build their roster? Is that how they want to build their roster? Or do they want to use that cap space towards offensive line or defensive line or whatever else? So, I think sometimes we get so caught up in fantasy football for those who enjoy it, right? And this is what we're thinking about in Dynasty. It's like they're not playing Madden. They're not playing fantasy football. They're trying to win games to win a Super Bowl. And they may feel that we're going to go in a different direction. We can't pay for both those guys. So, I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's very possible that he will not be back. And if he is not back, although I know Joe Burrow wants him back, where he goes could have huge ramifications. We saw what even happened with a guy people thought, were really promising with Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville. Ends up going to Tennessee. Now he ends up salvaging a little bit. But, the air got out of the balloon when he went to Tennessee. People were not all that thrilled about him going there. So if Tee Higgins is chasing the money, which he has come on and said, hey, it's not all about money, but you never know. You don't know what to believe. Players, coaches, whomever, anybody who talks to the media, you can't take it to the bank. We don't know. You got to put your money where your mouth is, and we'll find out in March as to whether he's going to do it or not. But if you look at it right now, Tee Higgins, you're looking at probably getting a first-round pick for the guy, a late first-round pick, early second. Depending on your roster, I think, if he's not with Joe Burrow, and even if he is, he's dealt with injuries. Jamar Chase is the go-to guy there. So to me, I think with all the uncertainty around Tee Higgins, I know probably some will think I'm nuts and they say, hey, let's buy him. But, I'd be concerned.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely can see you're concerned for him and why you'd want to sell him. And no doubt, like for him to have the most intrigue, it would be returned with the Cincinnati Bengals. Stay with that familiarity. I think him and Jamar Chase need each other, and they work well off of each other. And and despite all the injuries and the fact that Jamar Chase is on this team, I mean, he's still the wide receiver 17. Like he still is very good. And I know there's skepticism, right? Where Tee Higgins, can he be a wide receiver 1 by himself? Obviously that's what I mean. Like, I think ultimately for fantasy, it's the best when they play together and both Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins win. But I just think from a Cincinnati football side, I don't think it'd be a smart investment for them to invest a big money into both Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase, because we already saw it this year. Like, their defense is suffering because of all the money they're spending on the offensive side of the ball. And despite the great performance that Joe Burrow had, all the stats, Jamar Chase and Tee Higgins having great years, a lot of those stats were just because they were always coming back in games and their defense was not good. That's great for fantasy, but you're not winning championships when that's the case.
Well, and they didn't invest in their defense. And
Right.
as a result, what you saw was Lou Anarumo was the sacrifice.
Yeah, he got the raw end of the deal on that.
He did, because he's a great defensive-minded head coach. He was a head coach candidate for a while, but he's a great defensive coordinator. But he was sent out to the wolves because they needed somebody to say, hey, it's somebody's fault. Zach Taylor can't just take it because he wants to continue to be the head coach, obviously. So I think at the end of the day, you look at Tee Higgins. I mean, I will say this. I mean, he only played 12 games this year, and he had the most touchdowns he's ever had with 10. The next closest was 7. He had 109 targets, which was one off the most he's ever had. That was over 17 games and 14 games. And 73 catches, which was 2 shy of his highest. But he's pretty much the same. If he plays basically a season, he's pretty bankable for about 110 targets, for about 74 catches, for almost 1,000 yards. He'll either just be under a little over, and he's probably going to get you 5, 6 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns. Touchdowns aren't a sticky stat. So because he got 10 touchdowns doesn't mean he's going to get 10 again. So, he's an intriguing player, but I would say at least test out the market, see what you can get for the guy.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt his name value and just how productive he's been, like you said, it's pretty much bankable. And there could be just people out there that are like, you know what, even if he's not with the Bengals, I think he can be a wide receiver 1 somewhere, and they might roll the dice and go ahead and buy Tee Higgins.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about a few players who are going to be impending free agents that we believe are Dynasty sell high trade targets. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.